presentation would be Kari. Kari is the product and development manager for the regional cloud team.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Samantha. So today we join this call to talk about SQL, migrating to SQL and the options for that. And I will be joined shortly by Dalian, our pre-sales architect for SQL and Azure and everything data related. So I'll just touch on a few commercial things. So as our resellers, it's always important to speak to you on the why of certain business opportunities. And with SQL, there are a number of reasons why we want to have you guys transacting, selling SQL and Azure as opposed to on-prem. So the big question is the why, right? When you do go to your customers, the question that you're most likely going to get is, should I move my database to the cloud? And why? Why should I do that? So the truth is, there are always more benefits than negatives to move your database to the cloud. So while there are times when situation will dictate that you remain on-prem, it's most likely that you will have more reasons to move to the cloud than to stay on-prem. So some of those reasons and benefits include agility. So the ability to increase and decrease your hardware count is one of the most important things in terms of moving to the cloud. So there are times when you may need to do some development testing. You may need to do a proof of concept. Instead of waiting for procurement to be able to give you the money to buy hardware that may never be used again after that proof of concept or that dev test that you have going. Why not just spin up some virtual machines in the cloud? When you're finished with that particular project, you can shut that down. So there is no wastage of resources in that scenario. You pretty much pay for what you need while you need it. Innovation is another important benefit. So businesses surviving nowadays is dependent on their time to market. You always have to stay ahead of your competition, ensure that your time to market is always ahead of your competition, So with the cloud, it's always easier for you to meet that time to market because your team is focusing less on hardware and outing fires and patching of hardware. So, as IT, we have to understand that our role has shifted dramatically from the past. So no longer is IT really only responsible for managing hardware, but the most impact that IT will have on organizations is actually helping them to ensure that they're meeting their time to market with their applications and their data. So freeing up the time for your IT to be able to focus on that role is a critical benefit of moving or offloading certain responsibilities to the cloud. So in terms of my risk perspective, the availability, reliability, and security, obviously the cloud wins there. As with high availability and disaster recovery, most software as a service or platform as a service solutions has those things built in to the product. In terms of security, Microsoft spends millions of dollars on securing their data centers. So trying to replicate that type of security on-prem, it's going to be a hard task to do that. Other benefits include cost savings, and cost savings in terms of physical space, power, cooling, light, hardware and software, implementation costs, etc. Again, there is no commitment. So gone are the days where you have to be tied into a particular product for 5, 10, 15 years because of that investment. Now, because you're paying for only what you need to use at that specific time, should your needs change, you can also change with the vendors as well. So that's one of the benefits of cloud, flexibility that you have in terms of products that you use that may meet a certain need at a certain particular point in time. So there are two flavors of SQL in the cloud. There is Azure SQL Database, which is a platform as a service, and then there's SQL on an Azure VM. Recommended is the SQL database, as with that, there is 47% reclaimed hours for staff because of the less managing of the resources. Your team gets to spend more time on actually managing applications and databases. 75% faster time to market. And there's also 53%, it's also 53% less expensive than on-prem or hosted. So your total cost of ownership definitely goes down with Azure SQL databases. There's also the reduced risk of unplanned downtime, which goes up by 71%. So as a reseller, where is the business opportunity right now for SQL? So you have a couple of places that there's definitely an immediate opportunity. One of those opportunities right now is open business coming to an end in December. So for those of you who know open business, that is a one-time payment. You purchase licenses. There's no software assurance attached to that. That particular way of buying servers, SQL servers is coming to an end in December. So that market of customers who typically buy those products, there's an opportunity there to move now to CSP perpetual or buying directly in Azure. So there's an opportunity right there. There's also end of support for SQL Server SKUs. We know that 2008 end of support has already passed. 2012 end of support is coming next year, and 2014 not far from there. So all your customers who are currently on 2008, 2012, or 2014 is a potential customer for you to have a conversation with about moving databases to the cloud. In terms of monetary value, a report from Forrester suggests that a typical assessment in Azure costs $120K. An average size for a migration cost is $225K, and the average deal size for application modernization is $300K. So clearly there's a lot of money out there to be made in specializing in these areas of Azure. Doing migrations of SQL databases, there's a lot of money on the services for these workloads. So there's definitely money on the table here to be had by our resellers. So how can Incomex help you on this journey? So we have a Incomex Cloud Professional Services program where we ask our resellers not to say no to any opportunity. Right? We have our solution architects who are available to help you, and we have technical assessments that are free right now. If you visit our ICP platform, you can easily request an assessment on a number of products that we sell, and these assessments are delivered for free. In addition to that, we have our consulting services and our managed services. So the idea behind this is, if you have an opportunity and you don't have the expertise to deliver the services, you reach out to Incomex and we'll deliver the services for you, and we'll deliver the assessments for you as well. So do not say no to any opportunity. This is a list of some of the assessments that we currently have in ICP. As you can see here, there's a SQL Server Hybrid Cloud Assessment. There's a database assessment. So if you have any customers that meets the criteria in the previous slide, such as end-of-life customers who you may see as potential opportunities for business, and you need to do an assessment to see what their solution would look like in the cloud, then feel free to request an assessment on that. So Incomex is committed to driving your cloud growth, and for this reason, we also have some incentives to help to push your interest in doing more cloud business with us. Some of these incentives include US $3,000 for the reseller with the highest incremental number of new customers, US $1,500 for the reseller with the highest incremental revenue from billing, US $500 from the reseller with the highest incremental revenue from billing in security workloads, and $500 for incremental revenue in data workloads. So some of these workloads, just to mention, is both on the modern workplace side and on the Azure side. So these are the SKUs that are in for the Office 365 side, and that is the Office 365 E3, M365 E3, the Business Premium SKUs, Defender for Office 365 Plan 1, and Defender for Office 365 Plan 2 as well. On the Azure side, these workloads, SQL Server and Azure VMs, SQL Managed Instances, Azure SQL Databases, and Azure SQL Edge. So these are the workloads that are in the incentive program and the reseller that has the highest number of incremental customers. And these workloads will get this prize. And this competition runs until October 31st. So the payout for that incentive would be on November 5th. So I encourage you to reach out to us for more information on this incentive and on the opportunity around SQL, so that we can help you to get some of this money that's out there waiting. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn over now to Dalian, who will do an in-depth presentation on the Azure SQL and the migration options for that.
All right, thanks very much, Kari. Hi, everyone. Good morning again. I am Dalian Barnett, a Regional Cloud Solutions Architect here at Incomex, and I'll be walking you through a little bit more in-depth conversation. Sorry, just get my screen up. All right, perfect. Right, so I'll be walking you through how you can accelerate your org's modernization using SQL on Azure. So let's get right ahead. So before we get started, I want to talk about the pace at which technology changes, right? And the pace can be due to, of course, real innovation, a real need, or as we saw in 2020 when we suffered that pandemic, right? Even though we're still actually going through that, those factors can also drive technology changes. And it is in, yeah, so I mean, many businesses would have gone out of operation, and many would have stood the test of time. And the difference is, if your business is able to respond to these changes faster, then that is going to give you enormous value right across the board, right? So yeah, so as you have seen, we have had so many different depressions over the course of the last 100 years. And we would have seen, many businesses come and go. Even today, we're still seeing businesses crumble to the likes of, let's say, Amazon or let's say Google. And I know these are really large companies, and they have exceptional talent and infinite resources. However, we still have a lot of businesses who are still able to operate and serve customers, and it really boils down to how can we go to market faster, how can we pivot, how can we adapt, right? And those are just some of the things that we're going to take a look at today when we look at the various ways in which you can run SQL Server on Azure. All right, so this is just some statistics from the business impact of cloud report, right? And companies that adopt cloud services usually, have a competitive advantage. So as I was mentioning before, you can improve your time to market. So that simply means that if you have a new feature, if you are, testing out a new product, let's say by focusing less on the underlying infrastructure and focus more on the business problem at hand, you free up resources to really tackle the problem. A 19.6% average increase in company growth. So you can attribute that to the first factor, right? If you can realize your new potentials, if you can tap into new industries quicker, then of course you can, let's say, save money, right, or increase revenue, right? And 18.8% average increase in process efficiency. So I mean, this can mean you have some sort of automation framework in there that can focus on freeing up time. But this only comes about when you really focus on the business problem at hand. And I want to make that the central theme here, right? And we'll compare and contrast that to how some companies are running these workloads on-prem. And it is estimated that 94% of all workloads will be running in the cloud by 2021, which is this year. All right, so a little bit about Azure. So Azure is Microsoft's version of a public cloud. And Azure has over 200 plus services that you can use to deploy, build, and manage your applications. Not only is Azure taking the approach from a cloud native perspective, Azure has a lot of rich integration services that you can leverage to bring those on-premises workloads that you have further to the edge. You can extend the various management and operational services within Azure into your on-premises data center. So when it comes on to things like, let's say, securing workloads using the Microsoft suite of security services, then you can always bring those into your on-prem environment and leverage those. All right, so the central point of SQL Server on Azure is reducing your management overhead and focus more on innovation. So as you would have seen in the statistics, the companies who are able to let's say focus more on the problem at hand will be more likely to succeed in the long run. So on the left hand side, we have what you are responsible for, right? and what Microsoft is responsible for is on the right-hand side. So as you can see, Microsoft is responsible for most of the hard work. So things from an infrastructure perspective, so the data center, the hardware, the operating system, right? Installing and configuring SQL, patches, backup and restore, the whole spectrum. And what you as a customer is responsible for is things that are very domain specific, right? And I want to stress on that. So if we should take a look at fixing outages, that does not refer to outages from the Microsoft side, right? That speaks to, let's say, things like blockages, deadlocks, or broken releases rather than infrastructure. So everything that you'll be managing by adopting, let's say, SQL Server on Azure is going to be domain specific, right? So specific to the problem that you're trying to solve. So it now reduces your need to get into general database management work and more into managing the database from a domain specific perspective. So now we will talk a little bit more about the different layers. If we should look at it from the Azure SQL perspective. So the first layer is a client layer, right? And that layer acts as an interface for the application to talk to the SQL database. And this can be on premises or in Azure. So this is normally your applications, right? So the services that you have that will need to talk to the database. So this can be Dynamics GP. This can be a custom bespoke application. This can be an off-the-shelf app. So anything really that is going to need to talk to SQL Server to either get data or persist data, right? The next layer that we're going to talk about is the service layer. So the service layer acts as a gateway between the client and the platform layers. So for example, if you need to, let's say, provision services, right? You want to add a new database, you want to increase the database service capacity, right? Anything that has to do with, provisioning, right? Billing, sorry, security, that will live at the service layer. And the platform layer is a layer that consists of the physical servers hosting SQL databases in the Azure data centers. And the only layer that you have to worry about really is a client layer, right? And anything that you do from, let's say, from the perspective of provisioning these resources, you can either do that through the UI or through some command line interface, right? And finally, the infrastructure layer is a layer that is responsible for the administration of the physical hardware and the operating system. All right. All right. So in terms of Azure SQL on the Microsoft Azure Public Cloud, then we have three options really. So on the left-hand side, we have our SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. So this is usually considered a lift and shift approach, and it is best if you want to, let's say, gain the benefits of what the Azure platform has to offer without, let's say, investing in re-architecting your application. So this is usually, this is usually the first step that you'll take when you are, let's say, migrating your workloads to the cloud. So this will result in minimal to no downtime at all. So it's as if you are picking up exactly what you had on-prem on your virtual machines or on your physical servers, and you're just copying them and pasting them in Azure to run on Azure virtual machines, right? Some other use case for this to be a good option is if you want to have OS level access to the machines that are running your SQL Server. To the immediate right of SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines is Azure SQL Managed Instance. And this normally comes in play if you want to modernize your applications and you want to, let's say, reduce the amount of code change that you have to go through. So this is a fully managed platform as a service offering You don't get access to the OS level, but you do get access to all the platform as a service benefits, such as automated patching. You get things like automated backups, point in time restores, etc. Right? And it is also important that in terms of feature parity, SQL Server on Azure virtual machines and SQL and Azure SQL managed instances have very good feature parity. So if your applications were architected for SQL Server on virtual machines, then more than likely you can quickly adapt that to work on Azure SQL managed instances. And to the immediate right of SQL Server managed instances is Azure SQL Database. Please note that this is best for supporting modern applications, and I'll really tell you what I mean by that. So let's just build a use case, right? So for example, conventional database backups are not supported in Azure SQL Database, right? The way in which Azure SQL Database is architected, a lot of the let's say SQL Server features, right, such as reporting features, those are stripped out, and what you get is a really thin layer to only be let's say focused on retrieving and storing data. So that may seem like not a good bargain, but when you think about how a SQL Server was architected, that was many years ago before the cloud. And if you want to, let's say, move in a cloud native manner, then what you find is that you can really architect your applications in a way that can let's say make use of what the cloud has to offer. All right, excuse me. All right, so we're going to move on to the next slide, where we look at some of the deployment options for Azure SQL managed databases. And there are two different hosting options with Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL Managed Instance. You get a single database, and you can have an elastic pool, right, or an instance pool if you're dealing with the Azure SQL Managed Instance. So a single database assigns a certain amount of resources via performance tiers, right? What you get is you get a predictable pattern and a relatively stable workload. Now, this is best for modern cloud-born apps requiring the most management simplicity, right? We will look at definitely how you can provision these, but please note that single database option is available with the provisioned or the serverless compute. We will look at what those mean in a bit. The elastic pool is a shared resource model that enables higher resource utilization efficiency. So with all the database within an elastic pool sharing a predefined resources, then for example, if you are running a multi-tenant application architecture, then what that will work out to be is it will be a highly cost-effective scenario for you. And this is especially appealing to ISVs with software as a service applications, and the savings can be significant. And I mean in the hundreds of thousands of dollars or more, right? And this is USD. Now, if you look at the Azure SQL managed instance, the single instance assigns a certain amount of resources via performance tiers, and this really focuses on a simplified instance scoped programming model with the broadest SQL Server compatibility. So again, if you are migrating from an on-prem SQL Server on virtual machines or physical server, then this would be the best option for you in terms of feature parity and compatibility. And finally, the instance pool provides a convenient and cost-effective way to migrate smaller instances to the cloud at scale. So let's say you have many applications running and you want to, let's say, group the performance and the resources and reap the benefits from a cost savings perspective. Then essentially what you can do is that you can provision an instance pool, which now you can essentially pool those resources and pool those applications together to use the same resources, right? All right, so let's move on to the next slide and we'll look at how you can purchase SQL servers, right? So you have the vCore model and the DTU model, and that's from the purchasing side. And from the provisioning side, you have the serverless and the pre-provision model. And we will look at what those mean. So the vCores is simply assigning virtual cores or virtual CPUs to your databases, and this is really if your application needs predictable performance and scalability. Now the DTUs are a little bit different in that these are prepackaged units that represent the database power, and they are really geared at, let's say, if you want to have a predictable performance baseline. Also, the DTU models group compute and storage. So if you cannot scale compute without scaling storage. So as you know, there's a high coupling there. However, with the vCore model, you can scale the cores independently of the underlying storage that you need. On the compute side now, the serverless, it automatically scales, right? So what you get is if you have nothing running, meaning that your application isn't requesting data from your database, then essentially you can save throughout that period. And then when your apps are ready now to call on the database, then the database will now essentially be invoked and can scale to whatever capacity. So this is very well for unpredictable workloads, right? So if your workloads aren't really compute intensive, right, or you cannot pre-predict, let's say, you know, what the usage will be like, then you can always look at the serverless model. Please know that serverless model does have a downside in which there's going to be latency from that, you know, invocation to the time in which the service processes that request. So if latency is a big deal, then you want to look at the pre-provision model. So the pre-provision model provides a fixed amount of compute for a fixed price built per hour. So you can definitely predict down to the very cent based on what your compute needs are. And this is best for regular usage patterns or multiple databases using elastic pools. All right, so now we'll look at how you can match your performance to your workload requirements. And as you can see, we have three categories. So we have general purpose, or GP, we have the hyperscale, and we have the business critical. So general purpose is you know, geared towards, you know, budget oriented workloads. If you don't need, let's say, hyperscaled performance, then general purpose is really good for that. It gives you a very good balance between compute and storage. Hyperscale, on the other hand, is best for data intensive applications. So that is apps that have large data capacity requirements and the ability to auto scale storage and scale compute fluidly. And business critical is great for applications that have high I/O requirements. So any applications that really need to be you know, responsive down to a couple of milliseconds, then business critical is the best option for those. And if you look, you can see the capacity. So On the general purpose, you can go up to 80 vCores, same with hyperscale. And with the business critical, you can go up to 128 vCores. And the storage, you can go up to 8 terabytes, sorry, for the GP. And for the hyperscale, you can scale up to 100 terabytes of storage. And on the business critical, right, you can go up to 4 terabytes per instance. And another thing to note is that on the business critical, they're able to, on the business critical, they're able to guarantee this high IO because they're actually leveraging local SSDs. So the SSDs are actually in the same machines that are actually running the SQL server workloads, as opposed to the other two. All right, so how do you pick your Azure SQL models and service tiers? So let's start on the right-hand side. So as I mentioned earlier, if you're in a scenario where you need to get started quickly, if you, I keep doing that. If you need to migrate to the cloud with the least downtime, and you need to maintain control over the operating system, patching, scaling, your availability set, stuff like that, then you want to look at SQL Server on Azure virtual machines. So it gives you, many of the same benefits that you'd reap, if you're running these things in your own corporate network. In the middle tier now, we have your online transaction processing applications. It really depends on the workload that you're looking for, that you want to run, right? And as you can see, you have general purpose, business critical, and hyperscaler. And this covers both SQL Server database and SQL Server managed instances, right? On the left-hand side, if you want, let's say, run analytics as well in your OLTP database, then you'd want to look at hyperscale. Because remember, with the hyperscale, you get really low IO, right? So you can essentially run a hybrid in the sense of a OLTP and a OLAP database on the same service, really. All right, so in terms of getting your existing data in Azure SQL, please note that this migration section that we're going to touch on, you can migrate from virtually any database. So whether this is MySQL, PostgreSQL, we do support Oracle as well as a source of migration, right? So essentially, you can migrate from third-party databases into Azure SQL with these tools that I'm going to mention. All right, so the first thing that you want to do is to select the service model, right? So decide whether the database will be deployed individually in an elastic pool or as an SQL Server managed instance, right? And this is going to be dependent on your workload and what you're looking for. This is important as the service model will affect the overall pricing, right? And the service tier, the performance, and the management of the database. So this is very crucial. All right, so the next step is to select the service tier. And this is more geared at the performance, right? So this is important as it will affect the performance of an Azure SQL database. So if you choose a service tier that is too low, then you will essentially have a lot of latency, probably corruption, all those things that you want to avoid. And if you select a service tier that is too high, then you are going to pay for unnecessary resources. Now, the best way to do that is to look at what you currently have, look at the performance patterns, and then based on the key points for each of the service tiers, and you can definitely map to that. Also, bear in mind that you can always scale up and scale down the service tiers if you find out that you have provisioned too little or too much. So you do have that flexibility. All right, so the next step is selecting the primary region and the disaster recovery region. So this also will affect, let's say, latency. So if your customers are in, let's say, Europe, then you would want to provision a database in, let's say, in the United States, right? The latency for that is going to be too great. And of course, you may end up with unnecessary bandwidth charges. So these are some of the factors that you want to consider. This one is very important, and I'm right here. Is determining the capability issues. So if you're migrating from a SQL server on your own virtual machines or physical servers, and you want to, let's say, have some of those SQL server reporting capabilities out of the box, then you'd want to look at SQL Server on Azure virtual machines, right? Because again, it's the very same SQL Server engine that you're running on-prem. You can install all those other tools on it, right? So you want to determine what are the different capabilities that you want from your database. We have tools that you can use to let's say get this information, right? So you can essentially select your source and your destination, and the tools will tell you whether or not the things that you have running in your source is supported in the destination, right? And the final step is selecting a migration tool. So Microsoft provides various tools to automate the data migration process, right? You can also write PowerShell or C# scripts for those who want to, let's say, go that route to automate the database migration process. And also, it is also the best route to choose the best tool for the job. And that is going to be dependent on, let's say, the size of the database and the downtime that you can tolerate, right? So we'll touch on some of those. So the first tool is the database migration assistant, or the DMA, and it's a standalone tool for detecting compatibility issues when migrating on-premises SQL databases to Azure databases. So when I just mentioned that you want to ensure that any tool that you use in your source DB is supported in the destination DB, then this tool is the best tool for the job. And it's a simple, lightweight software that you would install, and you can now use the UI to go through that migration assessment. So it really detects any sort of compatibility issues. And once all issues have been identified and fixed, you can then migrate the database. The next tool is SQL Server Data Tools for Visual Studio, right? And for example, if you are a developer and you're in the process of, let's say, moving your application over to Azure, then in the same breath, you can use your development tool, which is Visual Studio, to let's say, choose the source and the destination database, and it can highlight any incompatibility issues, right? And also know that issues can be fixed by using the SQL Server Data Tools itself, and then you can migrate the database with this tool. The other tool is the SQL Server Management Studio, and I'm hoping that for many of you on the call who may have had experience using some of these tools, you can realize that you don't need to necessarily learn anything new. You can use the same tools that you have been using to perform some of these migrations. All right, so back to SQL Server Management Studio. So essentially, you have two options to detect and migrate. So you can export you can use the export data to your application, and this export the data and schema in a backpack file. which you can now search that file to find any sort of incompatibilities based on the destination. Right, so if you're moving from SQL Server on-prem over to, let's say, SQL Server a database, based on that export, you can detect any sort of incompatibilities. And you can deploy database to Microsoft Azure SQL Database, right? So essentially, this again is geared at moving from SQL Server up to an Azure database, right? And this deploys the database to Azure Database by first exporting the database in a backpack file. Again, you can see that pattern there, and then importing the backpack file into Azure Database. It lists the incompatibilities when generating the backpack file. So those are just some of the tools that you can use to engage in your database migration. And that marks the end of the presentation. And I'm hoping that we have some questions. So I'll turn over to Samantha. Thank you.
All right, everyone, thanks for joining us. And I do hope you enjoyed the session. Now I'm opening everyone's microphone so that you can go ahead and ask any questions you may have. Go ahead, Dave Watson. Your microphone, you can go ahead and open your mic.
Hi, okay. Hi, good morning. I was just wondering, you had recommended that we pick the data center closest to us, because there may be additional bandwidth charges. I found that curious. Why would that be so?
All right, so that's a good question. All right, so when you let's say deploy your resource to a specific virtual network, and I'm sorry for those who may think that I'm getting too technical, but this requires a technical response. So you have two options. You can route via the Azure backbone network, or you can route via the public internet. So if you choose the public internet, essentially what that is going to do is that is going to enter the Azure network based on where the user is coming from. So let's say if that user is coming from a European, let's say ISP, then it will enter the network basically from the European side. So once that gets into the Azure network, then there's going to be some sort of regional bandwidth charges now. If you choose the other option, then what that is going to do is that is going to now try to detect where that resource is running from. So if this is in, let's say, the East West region, North Virginia, then it is going to now route over the public internet, all that switching and fancy stuff, and then enter the network from that side. So what you'll end up with is, if you choose one option, then you're going to end up with a significant amount of bandwidth charges, and if you choose the other option, then what you'll end up with is a significant amount of latency. So essentially what you want to do is, if you have your users in, let's say, in a US region, or let's say in the Caribbean, then you'd want to locate those resources closer. Dave, did I answer your question?
Yeah, you answered it. Okay, so now I have a way better understanding. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to go ahead and drop that link in the chat as well, so that you can have that for reference.
Thanks for your question, Dave. Any other questions? We'll have 5 minutes to wrap up. All right, so if there are no more questions, guys, remember.
Okay. No, I'll just ask another one real quick. Okay, so for small companies like myself who has no technician available to become experts in these fields, separate and apart from, for example, IncomeX personnel, is there anybody else from Microsoft that we could talk to? I'm just curious about getting customers the required big level picture, if that makes sense.
All right, so let me see if I can. So what you're wondering is if it is that you have a customer who you need to pitch or who has the potential to purchase cloud from you, if it is that you can have a meeting with them, but you use a Microsoft representative instead of an IncomeX representative. Is that what you're asking?
Something along that line, yes.
All right, so first and foremost, Dave, IncomeX cloud team comes what we call white labeled, right? So anyone who brings us into a pitch meeting, we do not recognize as IncomeX. We recognize as your organization and not ours. So your customer would not know that you are in fact purchasing from IncomeX, the distributor. Does that answer your question, Dave?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Well, it's okay. So I had a scenario the other day where, for example, the customer said to me that, Dave, listen, we need to, we have work from home. I need to move my server to the cloud. And the truth is that because I did not spend a lot of time, going through this because of the amount of hats that I wear, I was unable to advise them as best as possible. And I found myself looking around at Microsoft trying to figure out who it is, but somehow I don't know why IncomeX did not register in my head. About what it is based on what the customer wants, what it is that Microsoft has to offer them. So that's how that question came up.
Okay, Dave. So as the distributor for Microsoft, it is in fact IncomeX that would be your first point of contact as it relates to those issues. And then our solutions architects, such as Dalian, would set up a call with you and your clients and hash out what it is that they're looking to get and what it is that you're looking to achieve, and then be able to advise you as to how it is that you'll be able to assist this customer. So as Kari mentioned in his presentation, we have the IncomeX Cloud Professional Services, and that's an entire team of professionals who are able to help you to be able to achieve what it is that you need to achieve in the cloud.
Yeah, got you. I just don't know why it didn't click to me to contact you guys.
Okay.
But what I'll do is I'll just set up a meeting with the customer. I'll just set up an additional meeting and we just take it from there.
All right, then, no problem. And you have my email, so you can just send me the email and I will follow up with Dalian as it relates to that.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much for your time. And remember in Kari's presentation where IncomeX is here to help you to win, and you can win up to $3,000 for the highest number of new customers that you sign up for cloud services, whether it be Modern Replace or Azure. Now have a good one, and I will be sending you this recording. It will be posted on YouTube as well for your personal viewing. Thank you so much for your time.